Okay, thank you very much. We would like to continue. Thanks very much. Please stop flashing now. Thank you very much. So the introduction will be held by Peter Bry from Terre des Hommes. Please, Peter.
Guten Tag, meine Damen und Herren.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Peter Bry. I'm the Secretary General of Terre des Hommes Foundation. I will make my introduction in English. Christine will be moderating in German, and Heinrich Fichter will also be talking German.
Last year in Davos, big issues like Africa, poverty, climate change were very much on the World Economic Forum agenda. This year, the issues seem to have largely left the Davos radar screens, and this open forum panel on the respect of fundamental rights is therefore particularly relevant. Now, life cannot be reduced to economic indicators. Economic development, however important, will not automatically deliver fundamental rights. We cannot simply sit back and wait for this world to become a better place, because life is not about waiting either. Life is about many things. Life is about consciousness. Life is about looking squarely at the reality as it is. And life is about choices and acting upon those choices, day in, day out, step by step. It's about taking responsibility for what you do and taking responsibility for what you don't do. Now, all this is true for you and me individually, and also it's true collectively, for us as international community, states and organizations. Now, we know that as society, we have made choices on what we consider to be fundamental human rights and rights for children, because children are not simply small human beings. They need special protection and special rights. And as international community, we have not simply discussed this over dinner. We haven't dreamt it up. We have, after much discussion, made very formal declarations and often put them into law. The UN Convention of the Rights of the Child is such a formal document that was officially accepted in 1989. Since then, virtually all countries have ratified it, which means that the content is incorporated in national systems of law. So when we speak about rights today, it's not only about emotions, about ethics, it's about very precise things, a common language everybody understands. Now, of course, signing pieces of paper doesn't mean that reality is changed like that. It's the implementation that counts. It's the taking responsibility that counts for everybody involved. States, international organizations, companies, civil societies, you and me. And of course, the first one, the state, has a very specific role. No state, no laws. No laws, no rights. Without frameworks, without rights, the world becomes a jungle. A place where the strong rule and the weak can, and often are, exploited. More bluntly speaking, a world where some have lunch and others are lunch. Now, the good news is, of course, that nobody wants this. In our economic models, we want competition, not exploitation, and we want fundamental rights. However, the less good news is that many people in power think that the issue is important, but that somebody else should deal with it. And many still feel that the invisible hand of the market and self-regulation will somehow ensure that everything will end up right. Now, field actors like Terre des Hommes do not come from an academic perspective. We have both feet in reality as it is. We act and show extremely correctly that things can be done. We change reality. But is the world doing enough? And the obvious answer is no. And we all know the figures. Let's just take one, which was quoted earlier this week by Mary Robinson. 30,000 children under 5 years of age die every day of preventable diseases and the result of malnutrition. Now, that's a tsunami a week. 600,000 mothers die every year while giving birth to their children. So, ladies and gentlemen, is the respect of fundamental rights really a priority issue? Or has it become a priority for NGOs only? Is the world reducing rights to charity? Something we do when we feel like it, and only for the nice ones? Now, the panel here today is invited to discuss the different aspects of this highly complex reality. And Christine has asked me to briefly present the people on the panel to you. Dr. Khanoum comes from Afghanistan, from Kabul. She's a medical doctor, and within TDH, she's responsible for a group of more than 30 midwives that make house visits in the city of Kabul and Kandahar to young mothers and their children. These ladies have done that in the times before the Taliban, during the Taliban, and continue to do that today. They know everything about giving birth and to prepare for life, even in quite impassable circumstances. And in all those years, with all the violence and all the bombardments, these midwives only stopped work for 2 days. Child rights, inaction, or charity? Thank you for being here with us. Angelina Jolie, of course, hardly needs an introduction, although most of us only know the role she plays as an actress. Angelina, as a person, is, among others, Goodwill Ambassador for the UNHCR, the UN organization dealing with refugees. And in that capacity, she has shown an impressive commitment on bringing hope and inspiration to the most remote places. Angelina, welcome to, well, both of you.
Thank you.
Catherine Marshall comes from the World Bank. World Bank and IMF have a major influence on state economic and financial policies. Catherine has been with the World Bank since 1971, has been in charge of programs like East Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and is currently dealing with issues like ethics, values, rights, and faith in development. So highly relevant to have her here today. Thank you, Catherine. Ken Roth is Director of Human Rights Watch, America's largest human rights monitoring organization. Now, Ken has the experience, the guts, and the brains to constantly bring back the reality of human rights in the action of many governments, including his own. Welcome, Ken. Reinhard Fichtel is the terrorism delegate in Kathmandu in Nepal, and he's also a spokesperson for the international NGO community in Nepal. Now, we here in Switzerland, we have always had this special link to Nepal, this other mountainous and small country. But the people in Nepal are confronted to a situation of ever-increasing violence. Can we still speak about child rights in such a situation? Christine Meyer from Swiss Television accepted the difficult task of guiding the panel to the heart of this difficult but crucial subjects. Thank you, Christine, that you've taken up that challenging role, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter Bray from Terre des Hommes. Yes, not forbidden. Well, Angelina Jolie, since the media has announced that you will be here on that panel today, it was really amazing how much the interest in human rights has exploded, I have to say. We are really happy about that fact. So we have all the ears, the eyes here. And I have to switch now to German. I was asked to ask a question in German, so you might need a translation, I guess. I'm not so sure about your German.
I'm very good.
And so möchte ich Sie fragen.
I'd like to ask you the following questions. You've come here to the World Economic Forum, where all the economic and political and financial power meets. We are slightly on the margin, on the periphery, and are going to talk about human rights here. What is your personal motivation for being so committed to human rights?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm really excited that there is this panel. I was thrilled to, with all the different agendas going on at Davos. It was I was so thrilled to see that human rights was on the agenda. It is, if I could say, I think it's the most important. It's the root of everything. About 5 years ago, I started traveling with UNHCR, the UN Refugee Organization, to camps and visiting with families. And it was a shock for me because of how I grew up and what I was taught in school and what I was aware of, to see that there was a world that I knew nothing about, with gross human rights violations and so much poverty and so much distress. And in the years that followed, I saw so many people fighting. We all hear about different charities fighting to clean water, for education, for some kind of shelter. UNHCR fights for people to have the right to seek asylum. And we all do look at this as, which is I think the message of this panel, whether it's charity or is it our right. And the reality is, for many years I thought how nice so many people are helping with all these things. You know, the good people are doing a lot of nice things for people, for these desperate families. And then it was brought to my attention that there is this document, the Declaration of Human Rights. And what it says is that these are not things that nice charities do for poor people, but that these are the law. It's the law. Children should have an education. People should have the right to seek asylum. If they are in danger, they should have a right to protect their families. This is the law of the land, and it's what we should all follow. So it's been a different way to approach it, and it has become very important to me.
Wenn ich hier gerade anschließe.
Perhaps I may just link up to that. You said, if I may just link up to that, the states, you say, have subscribed to the human rights of children, but the United States has not ratified it. What does that mean to you? Are you ashamed of that?
Yes, I'm absolutely ashamed of that. Being an American, I think it's horrible. I think Congress should ratify that and do that for children. If we really care about children, how dare we not sign the Convention on the rights of a child and the rights of women, and also we should support the International Criminal Court. There are many things that, as an American, I've discovered in the last few years that have shocked me about my own country that I am very ashamed by.
Eine Frage an Sie.
A question to you, Kenneth Roth. It's maybe a little difficult. We are here and we've been discussing for decades about the human rights and the rights of the child. And it's so frustrating to think that nothing is moving, nothing is changing. You come from Human Rights Watch. Do you think that the situation has deteriorated markedly, or is it still the same as years back?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. This is my second open forum, and it's wonderful to see so many people taking an interest, not just in Angelina, but also in the issues. So it's great to be here. Angelina rightly points out that there's some governments like the United States that still are not comfortable even ratifying the major human rights treaties that are out there. But in terms of, are things getting better or worse, it really has been true that over the last 4 years, there's been a significant step back in respect for human rights, even on the part of governments that traditionally promoted human rights, governments like the United States and even some of the governments of Europe. Now, the context for this we're all aware of. It's the fight against terrorism. And I don't want to diminish the importance of terrorism, because deliberately attacking civilians is an affront to everything that the human rights movement stands for. It's horrible, and it needs to be stopped. But it should not be an excuse for violating the same values, the same laws that explain what's wrong with terrorism. It's important to maintain the moral high ground in fighting terrorism, but the US government in particular has lost that moral high ground. It has been using torture. It has been detaining people in secret detention facilities. It's been disappearing people. I fear that that is not only wrong, but it is counterproductive. And it's a problem that increasingly Europe is encountering as well, because, for example, a Swiss man by the name of Dick Marty has been assigned by the Council of Europe with the task of uncovering whether secret detention facilities were maintained in Eastern Europe. We know that they were. It's up to the governments of Europe to come forth with that evidence, not to depend on some Swiss man to try to get into the deep darks of European intelligence agencies. So we all have work to do here.
Dankeschön, Kenneth Roth.
Thank you, Kenneth. Another question to lead on. The United States sees itself as the world's policeman. The United States sees itself in the role of the world's policeman. You are saying that the war on terrorism has led to the violation of human rights to a great extent. And does this mean that now the states feel free, other states feel free to also violate human rights?
Yes. Unfortunately, we're seeing a copycat effect around the world. I actually had an experience just last year here in Davos. I was meeting with the Prime Minister from Egypt, and there had just been a terrorist incident in Egypt, and the Egyptian government had rounded up a couple hundred suspects and started to torture them. And so I asked the Egyptian Prime Minister, what's going on? How can you possibly justify torture? And he said, well, what do you want? That's what the United States does. We're finding this over and over, where governments are using the conduct of the United States or Britain or of other countries that are willing to violate human rights in the name of fighting terrorism. They're using this as the new excuse to ignore human rights. And it's also a problem because, frankly, the voice of the United States or Britain or others as promoters of human rights has been compromised. US diplomats today cannot, with a straight face, go to governments and say, don't torture, don't lock people up without trial, because those governments will turn around and say, well, what are you talking about? What about Guantanamo? What about the secret detention facilities in Europe? What about rendition, sending people to be tortured? What standing do you have to complain about these issues? So this is a problem, a very severe problem for the human rights movement, because abuses in the name of fighting terrorism are undermining the standards, and they're degrading the voices that traditionally had helped to promote those standards.
Thanks. Ich möchte mal auf dieses.
Let me turn to this side of the panel. You work in the field day by day, Dr. Noor in Afghanistan and Reinhard Fichtel in Nepal. You are now sitting here on this panel, Dr. Noor. You're on this panel here in Davos. You see there's a lot of press in this room. There's a great attention from the media. What do you expect, quite specifically, from a panel like this one? What would you like to tell us?
I am very happy that I am here to raise the issue that we have Afghan women has in our own country. The issue is that thousands and thousands mothers, pregnant women, women just giving birth, and they are newborn, they don't have access to the health facility due to cultural limitation or extremely poverty or returnees, IDPs, internal displaced people, or because of lack of awareness that they don't know where they should go and where they should receive such facilities for their health. I'm coming here to raise this issue and ask for support that from all to support Afghan women that they are living extremely in very hard condition in our country.
Thank you. You have been in Afghanistan, Angelina Jolie. What did you see there? What did touch you there?
I spent most time in Pakistan on the border with Afghan refugees, but I'd actually love to ask, I mean, the experience I had certainly was a lot of very, very strong, amazing people surviving against unbelievable odds, so I commend you for your work. I'd like to ask you if you could tell us about the situation in Afghanistan now, because I think for many people, maybe back in the States, this is more relevant, but they feel that the situation in Afghanistan has stabilized in some way or is getting better, and I'd like to know your opinion on what it is like inside Afghanistan now. Do you feel it's getting better, more safe, or is it still very...
First, I'm a doctor, not politician, but only I see some improvement that right now the education exists for all the girls. This is, for me, is very extremely improvement. Schools and education available for the people in the country. But we have a cultural problem that, for example, the fathers and the men, they don't allow their daughters to go for education. And as well, we have for me, is very important that after a long time, we have selective government in the country. But besides, the people are disappointed that our parliament is more involved by the people who were warlord or who were destroyed their country. This is also not acceptable for the people, but I'm not sure how as a leader in the parliament. This is the majority of the people, they don't like them. This is for me some improvement and some, for sure we have right now national army, national police, and but beside all this problem, the surface of the country seem very well, but we have very deep problem in the community level. And majority of extreme poverty as well exists in the country still.
And also problem with the security, right? I mean,
Yes.
we were having lunch together yesterday, and you told us all those really bad stories about kids who disappear. If you send them to school, they will never come back. You have absolutely no idea where they are. They're going to be sold.
I have 4 children, and I'm going to the job from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock. When they are in the school and they're going to the school, I never believe when I return back from my work, I first check my children that they are okay or not, they are in the house or not. Really, last year we had a lot of disappeared cases of children in the country.
And what is happening to them? Do you have any idea? They're going to be sold as prostitutes?
Yes, I think so, because nobody knows. The child just disappeared, and nobody knows what will be the future of them. But the majority of the people discussing that maybe their eyes or their organ will be sold in the market, or for sexual abuse or these things. Maybe this is the idea of the people, but I don't know exactly.
This brings me to you, Reinhard Fichtel. Sie sprechen.
You come from Bavaria and speak the Bavarian dialect very broadly. Perhaps you will speak in your dialect, and we may like that. Perhaps you could tell us something about the human rights and child rights in Nepal. What is the situation like in Nepal just now? We also have the feeling that there's going to be some explosion there. Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, for coming to Davos, for having invited me here. I've just come directly from Kathmandu. We have 180 people in the middle west of where their Maos live. The conflict in Nepal really arises from the following: the gross violation of human rights that has lasted for the last 100 years, and the war in Nepal started in the west of the country in 1996. There are about 72 children that have already been shot by the security forces and others by the Maos. It has a very sad record because it has the largest number of disappeared people in the world. There's gross violation of human rights with the purpose of ensuring that the civilian population cannot help to resolve the problem or the situation. I'm very happy to be able to speak here on behalf of my team of people working there and on behalf of the children we work for in Nepal to tell you something about this conflict in Nepal here in this beautiful place of Davos.
Good.
Catherine Marshall, you have worked for years in the field. You worked in Africa. You're now working for the World Bank, and we'll come back to the role that is played by the World Bank in a little while. But listening to everything that has been said so far, what went through your mind? What comment would you like to make?
I think my first reaction is how close we are in our passions and in the issues that we see coming from very different parts of the world. But the place that I start is that the most fundamental right, the most fundamental issue we think for the Davos community and for the world is first the right to life without hunger, the right to education, the right to a job, and therefore the very complex need to do what our generation has showed is possible, which is to end poverty. It is possible. There are countries, Switzerland among them, which a century and a half ago, very few people were educated, where health was very poor, and which are now transformed societies. But there are many parts of the world where this process has barely begun. So the issues that we address as our first priorities are the end to hunger, the right to education, and to health care, and therefore to have the resources going, not as rhetoric, but as reality, to both the policy changes and to the programs that will really make a difference.
Wenn Sie sagen, meinen Sie,
You are saying we have to do, are you talking about the World Bank, or are you talking on your own behalf when you say we have to? Is it you or the World Bank you're talking about?
Certainly on what I believe deeply, but it is also very much the mission of the World Bank. As you come in the front door of the World Bank in marble, is our dream is a world free of poverty. And the objective, clearly, is that it should not be a dream. It should be a reality. And the question that we grapple with every day is what is going to make the difference? How can we keep attention on these silent problems of children dying, on the silent problems of AIDS, of refugees? How can we keep the commitment that people state and translate it into a reality that will lead to the better life that we know is possible?
May I perhaps make a comment on this? Of course, we are all passionate in our defense of human rights, and we all resemble each other in this. There are no differences. But if you look at the reality of the fact, in Central and Southeast Asia, Afghanistan, where for 23 years the international community just did nothing, did not intervene in Afghanistan. A whole generation of women and girls had lost the right to basic education. They have not learned how to write and read. 1.5 months I was in the middle west of Nepal, where the Maoist revolution started in 1996. Both the villagers and the government representatives tell us that nearly 90% or nearly 100% of the schools are dominated by the Maoists and not by the state. So where is that international commitment? Nepal is a kingdom. And in countries where there is a lot of fragility and vulnerability, where are we intervening? What are we doing to help these countries?
einfach als Kommentar oder auch als Frage?
Was it a comment or was it a question? Well, both. Perhaps we could just summarize what has been said so far. We know there's a lot of misery and direness, and Kenneth Ross says that this has deteriorated even more in the recent past. We know that something has to be done, and no one here in this room will say, well, someone will do it, leave it to someone else. But whom are we addressing this to, this request? Whom do we accuse, Angelina Jolie? From whom do you expect some commitment or intervention?
Oh my God. Well, I think it's manifold. I mean, I think we need to start. Many people here maybe have not even read the Declaration of Human Rights or are not aware of the human rights. The different things going on in the country. So I think maybe it's starting with educating ourselves, educating our youth, trying to work with our media and our news and asking them to share more the global issues, certainly in America. I think I'd like to turn on the news and know what's happening in Nepal. If there's something that extreme that happens, I'd like to know what's going on in Darfur. So I think part of it is that, it's education and awareness. I think I can speak for my own country, and as an American, we can all only do that, push our own governments in our own countries. which is to say that we should all fight for the ratification of these different conventions and push to make sure that our government is responsible. I am a believer in the International Criminal Court. I've been learning about it, and I'm sure there's much more to learn, but I think this is something we should all educate ourselves on and see what can be done when there are situations like Darfur that just continue, like Nepal that just continue, like you say with Afghanistan, that went on for so long that we intervened not because of the women. We can say we went to free the people, but that's not why we intervened in Afghanistan. And, you know, how many things are going on now? I have a country that says, you know, we're there to, you know, to free people, but we were deciding to free these people and not all of these people. So
This is this election.
So, you know, we have to really look at that and question ourselves and our own governments.
Can you throw?
When we talk about, you know, what can we do, I think it's important to realize that we're usually not talking about military intervention. I think that, you know, because Bush has tried after the fact to justify Iraq as a humanitarian intervention, suddenly people say, oh, we don't want anything to do with intervention. That's not what it's about. There are many things that we all can do. First of all, it's important to reveal the truth, to speak the truth. And many of our governments know what's going on in places like Nepal or Afghanistan or Darfur or elsewhere, but many are quite reluctant to talk about it. You know, it's not done in polite company. You might, you know, get the other government upset with you. And so we first have to insist that our governments speak out. They should speak out in general. They should not receive leaders who are committing war crimes or crimes against humanity or persecuting their people. They should make sure that they're not sending military aid, not selling arms to governments that commit atrocities. The European Union, and I realize Switzerland isn't part of the European Union, but nonetheless, you know, your neighbors, every one of the countries of the world that we're discussing, it has an agreement with them. And the agreement says, you know, we will give you aid and we will give you preferential trade benefits if you respect human rights. They're great agreements. They're completely ignored. Europe hardly ever uses these human rights clauses to put pressure on governments to respect human rights. They just did it in Uzbekistan, but it took the government of Uzbekistan literally massacring hundreds of protesters before Europe cut it off on human rights grounds. It had never before suspended a trade and cooperation agreement on human rights grounds. So we're not using the obvious leverage that we have, and none of this involves invading or sending in the troops.
One of the most frustrating problems for people who work in international development are the states whose leadership is not actively moving in the same direction, which seem not open to persuasion and with difficulty open to pressure. And the pain is the people who suffer and our inability to help them. I know one of the more troubling parts of my professional career was when I was responsible for an important part of the Zaire program during the years when Mobutu was the president. And when we knew that there was massive corruption, we struggled within ourselves. Do we continue to try to work with education and health care, perhaps in Ituri, which is so far away from Kinshasa that it was almost impossible to reach, or do we withdraw until the time is ripe? And we face these problems in a very practical way. I think we can operate, we can work at three levels. First, I think we know leadership is necessary, leadership at the global community and leadership at the national level. But the one qualifier I would put on that is that if leadership is not genuinely convinced, if people just read a speech or if they adhere to it, it simply will not translate into reality. We know that. The second, and I think this is what's exciting about seeing all of you here today, is that there has to be a broad social commitment to a global social contract, to a commitment to social justice and to the eradication of poverty.
Aber darf ich schnell dazwischen?
Could I just quickly comment on this, these commitments, these many papers and declarations? Yes, they exist, but they're pretty much waste paper if when the actual individual governments deal with them. You've got paper statements and declarations and commitments, but all that seems to me not to be enough. How do you, Angelina, how do you judge these declarations?
Take a specific case that I think is one of the most frustrating is we know that the single most important and best investment is something that's been mentioned here by two people, which is having girls in school. That it can transform, it has a huge rate of return, their children benefit. There's a correlation between a child's head size and the mother's level of education, because educated mothers feed their children better. So this is known, the research is known, people give speeches. But I was at a discussion yesterday where it's very clear that having girls in school depends on the genuine commitment of leaders. So we need to continue to persuade, we need to remove the practical obstacles, whether it's no toilets in schools or security for girls or appropriate textbooks or cultural adaptation. But you have to have the action at the ground, but if we don't have the conviction of leadership at national and international level, these things don't happen. They stay on paper, and they don't become the reality that we know can be.
You wanted to make a commentary.
I'm sure. Well, I'll follow up on the idea of schools, which I can't agree more that is so important. We all know that there's this that there are so many million children, over 100 million children, that do not get access to an education. We all know this is wrong. You know what to do about it. There are many different people here discussing it, and there are lots of different theories and some good things happening. And I think we can all just pray that somehow there'll be a big enough movement where this will actually be accomplished. There's this idea of a millennium goal we're supposed to all reach, that this is going to be finally all the kids are in school, free education. And again, this is, I think it's Article 26 or 25. This is a right for children. It's their right to have free education. But one group I'd like to mention, which is refugees, because I work so closely with them, and they are the most vulnerable. They've fled from some of the most unbelievable situations. They've seen their parents killed, they've been raped, they've been through things you can't imagine, and they're traumatized. And these are the kids that really need some help and some focus. They're in a camp, and this is a group of children, if you can imagine. They're in a camp maybe 15, 20 years. Some of the women you're speaking about in Afghanistan, these are young people in a camp. And in these 15, 20 years, we're either going to educate them and send them back to their country of origin, educated and ready to work on reforms, be strong leaders, or we're going to send them back uneducated. And then the country's going to be that much more corrupt, that much more to control, that many more people fighting for resources because they don't have any other options, because they don't have an education. This group is often a group that when we poll how are we doing with children's education, often we do it country by country. And this is a group I would just like to point out needs to be counted. So when we count country by country, let's please remember those people that don't have a country at the moment and are displaced.
Well, I certainly agree with that. You've got the United Nations doing very good work with refugees in Afghanistan, bringing back 1 million refugees to the country. But it's not just education we're talking about human rights as such. And for 23 years, the world's conscience looked away from Afghanistan, but there are successful operations underway in that country. But if you look at the map of Asia, you can see places where it's just as bad. In Bhutan, there are 100,000 Bhutanese refugees. There's ethnic cleansing, ethnic displacement going on in various places. There are reports that the Maoists have been recruiting people, and there is fear that young girls from refugee camps are being sold into India. So refugees arriving in Nepal from Tibet or from Bhutan, but once again, the world is remaining silent. Everybody signs the declarations, they make protests, but in reality, nothing happens.
Well, unfortunately, it is a sad day when the reality of education is such a privilege, because these people you're talking about, these youth you're talking about, they just want to survive, and first they need to survive, and they are dealing with so many obstacles before they can even get around to the idea of education. So, thank you. It's a very good point.
So let's talk about money also. This brings me to you, Catherine Marshall.
You take this.
Die Weltbank.
The World Bank distributes money, and that money is given to governments, and to governments also in countries where it is known that there is corruption, where we know there are difficult situations. Why don't you work more closely with the NGOs, for example, with Terre des Hommes? It's to be practical, to think of the case of Nepal, where we've heard about. Indirectly, you are supporting these governments with your money, which is actually intended for the underprivileged.
Well, let me give you the easy answer first, which is that the leaders of the world in their wisdom in 1944 created a set of international institutions based on nation states. And therefore, the World Bank is a cooperative of governments. So we must, in any country, whether it's Afghanistan or whether it's Nepal or whether it is Bolivia, we work through and with the government. So that's the easy answer. We don't have money to give grants directly to non-government organizations, to churches, etc. Let me give you, though, two other answers. The first is that something that I tell people, this is a danger of working for something called the bank, the World Bank. Sometimes we call ourselves the bank. Is that when people see us coming, they don't see a face. They see a very large dollar sign. And there is the sense that it is money that solves the problems, and it is the money that's important. And yet we know, and I think all of us would agree, that it is ideas that are more important, that are policies that are more important. And in fact, the main direction of our work is in the idea and policy area, to try to persuade, for example, a government of a policy that will have all girls in school, or to work with them to implement a policy of having all girls in school. The second part of the answer that I would give is that there has been quite a dramatic change over the past 10 years. So that 10 years ago, most of the bank's lending would have gone directly to implementation by government ministries. But a very substantial amount now is implemented by non-government organizations. And my own work has been focused on trying to build a very complex kaleidoscope of partnerships that involves faith organizations. So for example, in our work in HIV/AIDS, we know that it is communities and private sector and faith organizations and NGOs that must be the people that interact with people to change behavior or to provide support to orphans and children and to adolescents. And therefore, the money that flows to a government which is encouraged to manage a process where at least half of those resources go to communities and to non-government organizations. So it is a very complex set of partnerships that are what we consider the best practice, what works best in the countries and the many countries where there are exciting, extraordinary things happening today.
Okay, both of you want to make a commentary, I know. You start, short.
Yeah, a short, brief commentary from what is called the field. Clearly, we're all different people here among the panelists. and we come from different backgrounds. But when we talk about human rights, we are all in agreement. But when we look at cooperation, we see that representatives of the general federal government, for example, fly to Nepal and they meet Nepalese government representatives. They're people from the same class, the same caste, who are meeting there. And that's what happens in reality. The people who are trodden underfoot, whose human rights are violated, don't actually have a voice. NGOs are barely come into it, and people from the ordinary people are simply shut out by the security barriers. So there are two different kinds of discourse going on when we talk about human rights.
Kenneth Roth.
Let me try to address what I think is sort of the old-fashioned way of looking at economic development, which is very much enshrined in the charter of the World Bank. If you look at the World Bank's charter, it says basically, we don't deal with politics. We only deal with economic development. As if you can have development over here and politics over there, and the two have nothing to do with each other. Now, I should say that both Jim Wolfensohn, the last president of the bank, and Paul Wolfowitz, the current president, understand you can't maintain that distinction. But many of the governments that control the bank still try to keep the two apart. And let me give two examples about the problem of that. First is from Angola. Human Rights Watch did a report recently showing that Angola, which should be a rich country because it has all this oil revenue, $4 billion of revenue disappeared. Nobody knows where it is over a 5-year period. That's the same amount of money that Angola spent on all social services for its people, just out the window, or probably into a Swiss bank account. Now, you wouldn't have that if you had a government that had a transparent system that was accountable, where people could debate how to spend the money, where they knew where the money came from and where it went. So you need a free political system. You need a civil society. You need a free press for development reasons, because otherwise the money disappears. Another example, I was in Rwanda a few years ago, and I was driving around on these incredibly bumpy roads, and my skeleton was shaking, and it was, I could just imagine how awful it was for farmers to try to get their food to market. And suddenly, I got onto this road, which was beautiful. It was paved. I could go fast. And I asked somebody, where did this road come from? And they said, oh, that's the German government road. It goes to the former president's village. Now, who decided to spend money on that rather than on other things? This is what happens when you don't ask the people of a society what they need, but you just ask the government. Again, you need the freedom for people to be able to guide their development projects, to tell the World Bank, to tell the German government what it is that's most needed in that society so that it can develop in a way that really helps people the most.
But, Kenneth Roth, would you expect the World Bank to put more pressure on those governments?
Yes. I think that the World Bank or the IMF should be a two-way street. It's a bargain. If a government wants to receive this aid, it needs to do its part of the bargain to make sure that the aid goes to benefit the people, not into the pockets of government officials. It's as simple as that. You're throwing away money unless you've set up a system where the money is going to benefit people. And so I think that the World Bank and the IMF should be absolutely strict and sign contracts, basically. You've got to free your press. You've got to allow civil society organizations to exist. You've got to have transparent accountability within your fiscal system. You've got to have free elections. These are the things we know that make development money actually go to development.
Ken, you know as well as I do that these are issues that play out in different ways in different countries, and that the World Bank, first of all, is deeply involved, probably more involved than any other global institution, in trying to address the issue of corruption at a practical government level. That there are countless cases of where we have suspended or not done or withdrawn or done much less than we should have than we would like to for the poverty purposes, because we cannot be confident that the resources are being well used, and that we're trying to work towards systems that will work well. Likewise, I think you know that there are thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of specific efforts that are directed to participation and to engagement, to processes that are trying to hear the voices of the people. That doesn't change the fact that there are different institutions that have different responsibilities. And the World Bank tends to shy away from what we now call the P word, which is politics. Because we are, our board, our owners, the governments concerned, do not want us to get into issues of freedom of the press because they view those as the province of others. But the fact is that, for example, we have conditionality in a number of cases on publication of the government budget. We are engaged in country after country in where the budget will be spent. And if you've read recently about the case of Chad, there was a case where there was a very formal, elaborate legal agreement that the government would direct its resources to social sectors, to education and health, and to saving the money from oil for future generations. But that's the tragedy of it, that the government renounced that agreement. The government said they needed the money for security and for present needs. And what that means is that we are not operating, all of our operations in Chad are at a standstill. So what I would hope that we would come away, as we see this from our different perspectives, is that these are very complex problems. And if we don't recognize the complexity, if we don't respect the efforts that each of us is making in the field, I admire your work tremendously. But we also need to see what we can do from the chairs where we're sitting, and how we can best use both the resources and the influence that we have.
Möchte da Sie fragen, Dr. Noor?
Could I ask you, Dr. Noor? There are so many players in this whole development aid industry, if I can call it that. You working very practically and in a down-to-earth way with infant mortality and with mothers' health, facing this issue of infant mortality. Where do you get your assistance from in practical terms? Is it NGOs? Is it governments? Where do you look to for your hope?
Yes. We only get fund from terrorism organization, never from government. Yes. And what was, I couldn't.
This is okay.
Yeah.
Aber did you from the government?
Yes, for sure, but right now we have a very strict policy in our government, especially in Ministry of Public Health. They have a policy, they should, for example, the policy is a basic package of basic package of health service. Each organization who is working in Afghanistan, however, is international or local, they should provide such facilities from the hospital. At for example, they should support hospital, then comprehensive health center, then basic health center, then to the community. But we don't have such large amount of fund, and we aren't able to implement such policy in the country. Another point that I want to tell you, this policy is working for the country like you, but in Afghanistan we have cultural problem. The women don't have access to go use this CHC or this hospital because they don't allow by their husband, or they don't have economic problem. They don't have economic facilities. For example, even they don't have money to pay for transportation or to receive such medical follow-up from the CHC or from the hospital. They just train some community health workers that they are non-professional people. They just read, they can read and write, and they cannot provide, they cannot help the mothers, pregnant mothers or postpartum mothers or other newborns at the community level. So we have many difficulties. When we go to the Ministry of Public Health, they for sure they refuse us. And right now we are ignored, but we work in that country since 10 years in very hard condition, like Taliban period. On that time, nobody was existing in the country, but the only NGO was ready to work at that hard condition. After political changes that occur in Afghanistan and the situation become changed, 1,000 NGOs and other organizations like UN body, they are coming in the country. Everything is available for them. But totally NGOs are ignored by government. This is our problem.
Ich möchte Sie noch fragen.
Could I ask you, Angelina Jolie? I've read a great deal about your commitment, your actions in 20 countries or more, and it's been suggested that you have access to governments or government representatives. What has your actual experience been?
Überhaupt,
Are they really interested in these problems?
Oh, God. I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I don't. I'd like to feel that I can go, and certainly I can ask for a meeting with, in some countries with the heads of the states and try to express my concerns. But I can only fight them so much, and it's a lot of it comes back to how my government stands on that specific country and that specific. And if I say something to a government and I say to a leader in Darfur, listen, this is, I'm standing in the middle of Chad saying you've got to let these people come in more, or standing in Darfur and saying this is not right, they can say that's all very nice, but tomorrow somebody who represents my same country might say something different or allow something different to happen. So, I'm certainly one voice, and I try to be as effective as possible, but I think, but I really don't know. I mean, I don't know how effective I can be. The only thing I can do is to try to bring awareness, and certainly if there is something that has gone wrong or I see as corrupt, I can try to embarrass a government official and bring it to the world's attention and hope that the people who learn about it then move to action. So that's the best I can do.
I think you're a great door opener. Thank you for doing that. A last question, because it's almost finished at panel discussion. Then we let the audience being asked some question. Just very briefly and short, at the end, the last words. What do you want to make clear before you leave this panel, Kenneth Roth?
Right. Well, let me say, I do get a chance to meet with government officials around the world. And the one thing we have to remember that violating human rights is often very convenient for governments. It's a way to, get rid of a dissident group. It's a way to silence a nettlesome ethnic group. And we need to change the balance. We need to sort of increase the cost of human rights abuse in order to diminish the advantages that governments see. I mean, Angelina was just talking about Darfur, so maybe I should pick up there. I visited Darfur, and then I went to Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, and met with government officials. And they have their reasons for doing ethnic cleansing in Darfur. It's their way of getting rid of a rebel group that had started there. So it's to their political advantage. And the one thing that I noticed they really cared about, they suddenly perked up, is when I started talking about the International Criminal Court. And it suddenly became clear to me that the way to get these guys is to prosecute them. And so at that point, Human Rights Watch started a campaign to get Darfur sent to the International Criminal Court, which has now happened, and the court is investigating these cases. But this is an example where you can really change the balance, because these leaders, like to be in charge politically, but they also like their freedom. And the last thing they want is to end themselves up in jail. So you can always find something to change the balance to make it more convenient to respect human rights.
Thank you, Kenneth Roth. Catherine Marshall.
I think we need not only everyone on this panel, but everyone in this room to keep a practical and passionate focus on the issues behind poverty and the move towards the kind of world that we want to see, a world with social justice, which includes rights. And you need, in today's world, the kind of coalition that you see here. You need the genius of Angelina Jolie to help in communication. You need the international organizations as well as the national, but you also need the power of analysis and the power of persuasion. We need data. We need, vitally, the people like Terre des Hommes who are working on the ground. We need the media. And we need, I heard Gordon Brown just say to Bono, "You're my mentor and my tormentor." And to some extent, I think that Ken is cast in that role in this stage in his life. But we need, if we're going to succeed in doing what we know is possible and what we feel is our duty, and it is our responsibility of our generation, I think we need to find ways to work together so that we hear the messages that come from each of us and that we find ways to argue but also to collaborate.
Thanks. We go on with you.
Ja, danke schön.
Thank you. When you listen to the discussions and then consider the situation in countries like Nepal, you cannot accept delegating the issue of human rights to anyone else. It concerns all of us. We are all forced to observe very carefully what is happening. We are obliged to accuse, and we need a lot of courage.
Nur the last possibility to really Ihr Anliegen noch einmal hier ganz.
To express your concern, what is the message that you would like to give to the participants here and to the people at home? What do you need?
Again, I repeat my suggestion to all of you to support Afghan people, that really we are living in very hard condition at the moment. Still, we don't have so much access to life facilities. Thank you.
Angelina Jolie.
Well, God, I just think, if I can ask anything, I think it is for everybody in this room, including myself and all of us, to stay focused on this issue, to follow up on Darfur, to watch what's happening in the courts, to follow what's happening in Nepal, to follow what's happening in Afghanistan. You have the internet, you have lots of different things at your disposal to educate yourselves and not let it just become something that's in the last page of a newspaper that is this small, but really make it something that is important, that you are following and not letting these things just happen and not making yourself aware of them. So I will do that, and hopefully we will all continue to work together and see what can happen to make it somehow better. I don't know.
Thanks so far. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, liebe Gäste hier.
Well, participants, the floor is now yours. If you want to put a question, you'll have to stand up and raise your arm very high so that you can get a microphone. The microphones are roving microphones. They will be handed around. So you really have to make yourself visible. There's someone at the back of the room with a red pullover or sweater.
In Valley, USA. I have a question based on what we've heard in the last couple days at Davos with the emergence of China and India on the world economic stage, both of countries which don't necessarily have the cleanest track in human rights. How do you see this change in the prominence of India and China on the global stage, both from inside the country and on the international stage from a human rights, especially a children's perspective?
To whom do you address this question?
Actually, to Ms. Marshall.
The growing strength and the progress that both China and India have made is a cause of great hope. And I think we need to see the transformation, the largest improvement in human lives, in human history, has happened in China within the past decades that most of us at least have been alive. It is also a very clear lesson that we live in a diverse world, and one of the dilemmas of rights and human rights is how we translate rights and how we reconcile them with the cultural diversity that we know we need, and with our respect for the rights of individual governments. That is still the way that the world community is put together. We're a community of nation states. The one point that I would make is the power of education and health to transform these countries. The transformation that is happening is extraordinary. And it is, of course, transforming, leading to new demands, leading to new methods. And in both of those countries, those, I think, are the critical sectors for what will happen in the future.
Thank you, Catherine. Maybe we should try to keep the answers a little shorter. Like this, it's more room for questions. You want to ask a question? That's good, because you stand already.
Thank you. Sheila Killian, Chemie Business School, Ireland. I have a short two-part question for both Mr. Roth and Ms. Joly. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a beautiful text, but it's more than 50 years old. And would you agree that there are some rights which are important now which would not have been envisaged when it was written, like the right to live in an environment free of pollution, or the right not only to education but to information, such as the internet? And second, and related to that, do you feel there is a responsibility on multinational companies who operate in many different countries to uphold or at least not breach those rights? And I'm thinking particularly of Google's recent offering in China of a censored web searching engine. Thank you.
You want to take that one? Well, certainly. I mean, I think there's always room for improvement in anything. If there's the Universal Declaration, to look at it and see what can be improved. I think also if you look deeply into it, you could probably find ways to incorporate what you just said and understand when they say right to a quality of life, that means pollution. You could argue that, and it could be used and still, but certainly I'm not against redoing it, making it better. I think that's a fine idea. As for companies, that would probably be more for you to say. Only that, yeah, I'll let you handle it.
I believe that every company has a duty to avoid complicity in human rights abuse. In a case like China, that means allowing free trade unions to operate in your plant. It means avoiding child labor any place in the world, avoiding forced labor. You asked about Google. I worry about Google going down a slippery slope. Today it's decided to sacrifice its principles about free search in order to keep its business in China. What's going to happen tomorrow when the Chinese government says, well, who was it exactly who was searching for that dangerous clause, human rights? Give me their email address. That's what Yahoo did, and Yahoo turned over the name, and the person was sentenced to 10 years in prison. How's Google going to resist that now? Has it made its decision that business in China is more important than its principles? Where does it draw the line? We just don't know the answers right now.
Another question? There's a man yes.
My name is Rudolf Mäder from Swiss Radio. I have a question to Angelina Joly. Angelina, what is your position on the treatment of the US government on prisoners in the war against terrorism? We have heard from Kenneth Roth, the government is torturing people, prisoners, is holding them in secret detention centers and letting them disappear. What is your position on that point?
Well, my position is, I'm concerned about what is happening. I don't know all the facts, like most people, but I think, I plan to watch human rights violations happening, from any country, and that does not exclude my own. So certainly, I think as all Americans, we need to keep our eyes open and not just assume that because it's our country and we love our country, we've had trust in our country in the past, that we should just assume that it couldn't possibly be doing such horrible things. I think we all need to really, really listen to the reports that are coming out and really see what we can, when we should speak up and see what we can do. So it's shocking.
Another question. How many time do we have, Peter, for questions? Really? Is this okay for you too? Or? Okay.
Does anybody have anywhere to go?
Okay. No. 20 minutes, okay. You just tell us if you feel comfortable, Angelina Jolie.
Does anybody else want to talk about it?
Yeah. Okay. Let's ask the question, but we need a microphone.
I think we can hear her, no?
We can hear, maybe we can also yell it in the microphone then myself, if it's not too difficult, but the microphone is here.
My question's directed...
Can we know who you are?
Sure. My name's Christina Mulcahy. I'm from the United States. I'm with Hobart and William Smith Colleges. And this is directly towards Mr. Marshall and Mr. Roth and Mrs. Marshall. And I believe you guys spoke on the fact that you, in the past, you have used trade embargoes to pressure countries on human rights. But how do you intend to continue to use that in a highly globalized world where more transnational corporations and multinational corporations are existing?
That's a good question. I should clarify, I think trade embargoes are almost always a bad idea because trade embargoes tend to hurt ordinary people. I think much more targeted sanctions are the answer. Prosecution in the International Criminal Court is the most targeted sanction. That gets just the leader. Other things you can do is seize their bank accounts, or you can cut off certain kinds of trade that the leadership really cares about, military trade or arms or things of that sort. Or you can try to maybe limit the businesses that they own. But I think general trade embargoes tend to hurt common people much more than the government and therefore tend to be ineffective. Look at what's happened with Cuba. It's made no difference that there's been a trade embargo in place for, over 30 years. It's just hurt the Cuban people. Castro hasn't taken a step further toward allowing greater freedom. It's very counterproductive.
Two comments. First, the actual potential that we have in countries which have violated their agreements with us or many international agreements is simply to cut off disbursements. So if there's an education project or a health project going on, we suspend disbursements on that project, which is, as I was mentioning before, a very blunt instrument, and it's very frustrating to have to do it. Two other tools that we have. The first one is known as naming and shaming. In other words, the publicity, both positive and negative. And there, I would emphasize that in all human endeavor, positive reinforcement often works better than negative. So that if you combine the information and ranking, actually lots of countries look very carefully at rankings, whether it's the Human Development Index or Transparency International. Countries don't like to be at the bottom. So the putting the spotlight on a whole host of issues, including girls' education or HIV/AIDS policy, is very important.
Another question? Can you stand up so it's easier to us to find you?
Oh, sorry. Mein Name ist Yvonne Meister. Ich komme von...
I'm from Davos. I look after orphans and handicapped children in Bulgaria. I'd like to put a question. How can one help children if one does not have any connections? How can one help these children, deprived children, people who have a lot of courage but can no longer continue? I have this boy in Bulgaria who's disabled. His mother just abandoned him. He's been placed in an orphanage, a home for disabled children, both mentally and physically disabled, but he, in fact, is not disabled, and he's waiting to be adopted. He's found a mother, but this mother cannot adopt him because the state of Romania, the government, will not release the child. Romania wants to keep this child, even though this child has never stepped on the territory of Romania. The mother is a Bulgarian, she's single, and she would love to adopt this child, this boy. I have no access to the authorities, to organizations, but this boy has the right to be mothered, to have a mother. So what can I do? That's a very, very difficult and complex question, and I really don't know. I, of course, have great admiration for your commitment, and I really don't know to whom you could address yourself. I don't have the answer. Well, when an individual tries to do something, it's very difficult to overcome the obstacles. It's difficult to intervene as an individual, someone who's totally unknown. For a well-known person, for a star, it's easier to do something. For simple people, it's very, very difficult. Kenneth Roth, you want to come in on that?
I mean, it's hard to answer your question precisely, but I think what you point out, which is that any of us acting alone has a hard time making any difference at all. And one of the reasons why governments are so eager to prevent the emergence of civil society is because they know that fact. They know if they keep everybody isolated at home, we can't do anything. But if we band together, we can do a whole lot. So my suggestion to you is to find the groups in Switzerland that are dealing with issues of orphans or child welfare and work with those groups. They will have more clout, and other people, you'll find other people like you who share your concerns. And when people group together, you can make an enormous amount of difference. I think that's the important lesson.
Vielleicht kann ich auch sagen,
perhaps I could say something, maybe I'm wrong and making a mistake and I'll be reprimanded, but perhaps you could contact Mr. Peter Bry from Terre des Hommes. I'm sure that he could help you and give you some pointers. Would you like to say something to that, Angelina Jolie, or should we go on to the next question?
Only that I think it's wonderful that she's fighting for that boy and for all the children I'm sure that she has met. And you know, I know a lot about adoption, but I don't know specifically why that country isn't making that possible. So I'd be curious as to the reasons why. And I'm sure those groups that Kenneth spoke about would be able to help you.
Gut, nächste Frage.
Very well, let's take the next question. Over here.
Mein Name ist Claudia Galli.
I'm Claudia Galli. I come from Zurich, and I have a question for Mr. Fichtel. In your daily work in the field, of what use is the International Child Convention to you? Is it really a good basis? Is it a good backing, specifically? Answer, well, it's always a good argument when I meet with government representatives and organizations. It's a good foundation on which to make claims and demands, to defend people. If we can prove, for example, how the convention is being violated by both parties to the conflict in Nepal, so we can make it clear to both parties that they are responsible for these things. There's also a Human Rights Commission of the UN in Nepal, and we will certainly not hesitate to bring to the attention gross commission of violations. As Kenneth Roth has said, it's the only way as an NGO that you can also spread your own terror. Further questions?
Mein Name ist Hermann.
I'm called Hermann. I'm a Swiss. We've heard so many negative things, and I'd really like to tell you, or I'd like Angela Jolie to tell us something about a positive experience, and I would like to wish her all the best for lots of positive future experiences.
My God. A positive experience. Well, sitting on this panel has been one to hear from the others. I've had many positive experiences when I've traveled, mainly because of the people. I'm sure this lady here spoke about the boy. I'm sure that it's the strength of the people that you meet, and they're very inspiring. And you know, we talk about the situation of everything going on in all of these countries, but I'm sure that the women you work with and even the children that you've worked with, and you know, as much as they're coming up against the most horrible things, I bet they are some of the most spirited, amazing people. Who you know, so it's that constant. You are face to face with people who are just the greatest survivors, and pretty remarkable. The children are our children, no matter where you go, and that's always such a beautiful thing. And I've obviously had wonderful. 2 of my children are from these countries, and they've been the greatest joy in my life, and that's certainly a positive. But thank you for your question.
Einfach aufstehen, dass wir...
Just stand up if you want to put a question, if you want to have the microphone.
Christoph Stückelberger vom Schweizer.
I'm from the Swiss Federation of Protestant Churches of Switzerland. I'd just like to come back very quickly to this question about this boy. In Romania, we have ADRON, which is the organization of churches in Romania, and is also supported by our Federation of Protestant Churches in Switzerland. So you could also contact the Swiss Federation of Protestant Churches so that you can get the contact with the organization in Romania. And I think it really proves what has been said. The networks that can be formed by these organizations and by these NGOs is very, very effective, and it is through the internet that you can find out which organization is active in which country. Obviously, if you can work through such an organization, then you'll probably get a better result. Mrs. Marshall, you mentioned one of the most fundamental human rights as being the right to food, to eat. You know that we are trying to make this a more compulsory right with the help of the FAO, and to make it a punishable act if the right is violated. In 2004, the mechanisms have now been reinforced to achieve this purpose. So have you made any progress at the World Bank of making these human rights, and this particular one, a little more binding, more mandatory? I think that's what's needed. The Declaration of Human Rights is a very good declaration, but it's not mandatory. It has not been incorporated in national legislation as a provision that has to be abided by. So what is the role of the World Bank in this context?
I think our role is primarily in 2 areas. The first is to have better information, whether it's through survey data or through asking NGOs who are working in the field, through doing nutrition monitoring. In other words, if you don't know where the problems are, you can't do very much about trying to solve them. And many of the hungry people, the hungry children, are not always visible and obvious. So that, I think, is information is critically important. The second is that we do have a tragic irony in the world today that there's plenty of food. The issue is not growing more. It's first the distribution, getting the food to the right place, but even more, it's the systems and people having enough to buy, and mothers particularly having the knowledge of what will provide nutrition for the child. So the way that we approach it is, as it sounds, complex. It's at the policy level, and it's above all an issue that I think we're coming back to again and again in this panel, of implementation, of taking something that's announced or that's an idea that everyone agrees at a government level or internationally, and finding the tools that can make it translate into reality down to the level of the community and the family.
Vielleicht noch 2 Fragen.
I think we have time for another 2 questions. Nicholas Hoffman, I'm from Davos. I go to school here. I would like to know how closely together the governments, the NGOs, and the economy should work together in order to get some sustainable results. And to whom are you addressing this question? To Mr. Roth, Ms. Marshall, and Ms. Joly.
Ambitiös. Vielleicht versuchen wir es mit...
Rather an ambitious question. Perhaps we can give short answers so that we still have some time for one last question. Ken Roth, you start.
Catherine Marshall.
Or Catherine?
As you may have gathered, I believe very strongly in partnerships. Every time I work with NGOs or visit projects that they do, I'm caught in imagination and sometimes, in admiration and sometimes in envy because the people who are working at the practical level are dealing with single issues. They have the direct knowledge, they have ideas, and they're determined to solve problems. The institutions where I am, we're working at the policy level, and as wholesalers, we're often trying to be a catalyst. We don't do it ourselves, and that can be deeply, deeply frustrating, but it is also important. So all kinds of new partnerships that are creative and that are dynamic and that change with time are what I believe in.
Well, certainly I'm not an expert on this, but my experience in the field is that it's a wonderful idea. I think we all, certainly everybody working as closely together as possible would be the ideal situation. But the reality is, it often causes a lot of confusion because there are a lot of NGOs, there are a lot of different UN agencies, there are a lot of different people from different countries, and often the coordination between them is not good at all. And I've been wondering, and I think it's been brought up often, how, even at the UN recently, how better everybody can work together. Even UN agencies work together better. So I think that's something that we actually need to find a real strategic way to coordinate. Because as of now, it's a nice idea, but I don't think it is efficient.
I would just say that I think it's essential that NGOs have a role, whether it's in how the economy is run or how development proceeds, because NGOs tend to be the organizations that speak for the little guy, the person who gets lost in the process. So when it comes to, economic growth, it's the NGOs that are insisting that growth be on a playing field that is level, that allows workers to have trade unions, that allow people not to be discriminated against on the job, that prevents having forced labor or child labor. You don't get businesses doing that voluntarily. They need to be pushed by NGOs. And even the World Bank, Catherine's right that the World Bank is evolving, and they are now paying more attention to NGOs, but that still isn't the dominant view. If you're a loan officer at the bank, you get rewarded for sending more money out the door. You don't get rewarded for holding up a project because the recipient government hasn't paid enough attention to allowing civil society input. And so we need to make sure that in all institutions that are controlling development or the growth of the economy, that there is attention paid to the people who are most impoverished, the people who are most in need.
Thank you. So we come to the last question. Stand up with the grüne Streife. Ja.
Ich bin Daniel.
Daniel Hofmann. I also live in Davos and go to school here. I would like to know from Angelina Jolie, how you can have an influence on the political world in the United States. What are your possibilities of having an influence on politics at the level of the American Congress?
Well, I was a few years ago, I was extremely shy. I first went to the Hill, and it was terrifying. But I have recently become more active, and I've found that, I've trying to push two different bills, and I've met with different people in the foreign relations committees to express to them when I come back from a trip what I've seen in Darfur. And sometimes it's just feeding them the information that's directly from the field, and then they can go out and have a press conference about it, and it's their information, and it's something that they know, firsthand, and I have nothing to do with it. So you try to just feed information that is direct from the people that you were speaking of, just the people on the field, to try to pass on that information to those guys in Washington that make the decisions. And I'm still getting my footing there, and I'm still learning how best to be effective. But also, I've been trying to mix kind of the things that I've been doing in the field with the advocacy, and trying not to get distracted. So different things I'm doing in the field, I'm trying to bring very specifically. If I can do a program and it can do well, and I can bring the example of that program to a congressman and say, this is something that's successful, this is some tiny thing that's happening. So I'm learning to do things like that, but I'm still learning.
Thank you very, very much. Ich möchte mich bedanken.
I'd like to thank all of you. Thank Kenneth Roth, Catherine Marshall, Angelina Jolie, Nukam, and Reinhard Fischl. Thank you so much.
Oh, danke schön, danke. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You see, this is possible in Switzerland. You just can enter the stage. Thank you very much.